All right, welcome everybody to episode 17 of American Spirits. Today we have very special guest, Dr. Tom Woods. How are you doing?
Very well. Glad to be with you guys.
Yes, thank you very much for joining us for this review of Murray Rothbard's The Betrayal of the American Right. We also have Pete Quinones joining myself and Ryan today as well. How are you, Pete?
It's amazing, Charlie, that you still can't pronounce my name.
Quinones. Did I say it right?
No, but it's
What?
fine. Go ahead. Let's get.
Whatever.
let's
We
get
all know
going.
who it has to be, right?
This has never come up before, for the record. Ironically, the first time I read this book, I was driving to the Mises Institute and I listened to it on audiobook. I think that was the Austrian Economics Research Conference in 2022, and I actually met both of you there for Pete for the first time, and also Tom
I remember
Woods.
that. Yeah, that was cool.
So kind of ironic, I guess, that we're now reviewing it. So Ryan, obviously, I don't think it'll be a surprise to the viewers that Ryan is the one who suggested we review a Rothbard book. We've been covering the history of the Articles of Confederation period and also the Constitution. So Ryan, why are we jumping ahead now to Mr. Rothbard's book on the betrayal of the American right?
Right. So this is important intellectually. Rothbard drew a lot from the people that we've been reading from on the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. We have just covered the Progressive School of Historiography, Merrill Jensen, and Charles A. Beard, who Rothbard quotes at length throughout his own historical works. He's a very big fan of them. So there is a sort of continuity in how history is treated. So there's a internal consistency for us on that point. But recently, and I guess this was predictive on our parts because this has been planned, I think, for a month now. But the issue of who are the conservatives actually, where did they come from? Has the right always been what we see on Twitter whenever we see figures from the Daily Wire, the Babylon Bee, the Federalist, and whatever else talking about what the right wing is? Has it always been this way? And I've always found Betrayal of the American Right by Rothbard to be very underrated among all of his works. People will usually tell their audience to read something else by Rothbard, unless, of course, their focus is on the American right or warfare. So we've planned this for quite a while now. Recently, in this last week, though, I think it was Daryl Cooper who specifically recommended his audience to read Betrayal of the American Right. And we've seen a lot of attempted cancelings over people trying to cancel Buchananites on the right for saying that he should get the Presidential Medal of Freedom. So it's very topical as well, though that was, I guess, prescient on our parts.
Yeah, we basically have a carbon copy of, for in Rothbard's time, the National Review crowd. Not to get too polemical here, because we mostly focus on history on these streams, but obviously you have people like James Lindsay and whatnot filling those roles, specifically talking about Buchanan, trying to purge Buchananism from the right wing. So it is quite timely. Now, of course, we invited Tom Woods on the show today, not simply because we really like his podcast, but because he wrote the introduction, of course, for the edition. I think the Mises Institute was the first to publish this, correct? This is the only edition.
It was and this is explained a little bit by Rothbard himself in his own foreword, but the manuscript had been circulating for years and years and years. A lot of people had read it, but it hadn't been published, and there had been opportunities for it to be published that had come and gone. And so it didn't actually get published until after his death. And the Institute decided, look, this thing has sat on the shelf for long enough. We should clean it up and get it out there. So I was in residence at the Mises Institute at that time, so they handed that to me as a project. So I wrote the introduction, and I also made some editorial decisions, because there were parts of especially toward the end, where he had crossed out some really harsh judgments he had made about some people, like basically some right-wingers. He'd crossed them out. And there was somebody who worked at the Institute at that time who wanted to put those passages back in. And I thought, that's a betrayal of the author. I mean, if the author doesn't want to have that fight, or he thinks he was wrong the first time, and he shouldn't say these things, then he shouldn't say them. So I kept them out, even though you might think, yeah, but I want the gossip. I'd rather honor Rothbard than do that. So there were things like that. But yes, that became my little project. And before that time, in 1995, I had done the index for one of Rothbard's books, and I felt like, well, this is a way I can like contribute and be part of Rothbard's efforts. But I'll tell you something, if there's one thing you don't ever want to do, it's prepare an index for a book. It is a horrifying job. Terrible. So being able to write the introduction for one of his books, I thought, okay, now that's more like it.
Dr.
Yeah,
Woods, just really quick, we think there might be a loose cable on your end that might be causing some interference on the recording.
Just a little bit of static.
Just in case.
Well, I don't know. Well, we'll switch microphones just to be on the
Okay.
safe side.
All right.
Yeah. I don't
again,
immediately see
Charlie.
a way to do that, but no, at the bottom. No, that's mute.
There you
There we
go.
go.
Now you're good.
Settings.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, it's better?
Yes.
Yep.
All I did was mute myself and unmute myself. The equivalent of turning it off and then on again.
Sometimes
Yeah.
it works.
Well, it's becoming tradition to have random audio issues on these streams. Like it's never the same way twice.
Well, I believe
But,
in tradition, so I'm glad I'm here to be part of it.
This is the most
Ryan,
important stream we do, so of course it's going to be cursed.
That's okay.
Ryan, do you want to queue up the first passage that we have for the stream, the show on screen?
Yeah. So since we just mentioned Dr. Woods wrote the introduction to this book as well, typically we will have a segment where we just explain the book, its background, its author to the audience, but Dr. Woods does a very good job in the intro. I don't think that there's any real need to change the wording there. So just very quickly for the audience's sake, the introduction reads, since this book is likely to reach beyond Rothbard's traditional audience, an initial word about the author is in order. Murray N. Rothbard was a scholar and polymath of such extraordinary productivity as almost to defy belief. His Man, Economy, and State, a 1,000-page treatise on economic principles, was one of the great contributions to the so-called Austrian School of Economics. For a New Liberty became the standard libertarian manifesto. In the Ethics of Liberty, Rothbard set out the philosophical implications of the idea of self-ownership. He told the story of colonial America in his 4-volume Conceived in Liberty. His America's Great Depression, now in the 5th edition, used the explanatory power of the Austrian theory of the business cycle to show that monetary interventionism rather than capitalism was to blame for that catastrophe. He also wrote a great many groundbreaking articles. To name just 2, Towards a Reconstruction of Utility and Welfare Economics laid out a distinctly American approach to the contentious area of welfare economics, and Law, Property Rights, and Air Pollution may be the best brief Austrian contribution to the study of law and economics. In addition to his 25 books, there are 3,000 articles which span several disciplines. Rothbard also taught economics, edited 2 academic journals and several popular periodicals, wrote movie reviews, and carried on a mountain of correspondence with a diverse array of American intellectuals. So, like, my background is the Austrian school and Austro-libertarianism, so this is not a surprise to me, but I think since the Old Glory Club is a big tent on the right, this might be important for people that don't know about Rothbard or maybe only know him as the libertarian guy. He's a very accomplished academic, history, economics, and as well as his political contributions. So if there's anything there, I can move on.
Well,
to
I
the
would
next
say he
one,
was also a senior advisor to the Buchanan for President campaign in 1992. And he gave my favorite thing Rothbard wrote that's a popular thing was the speech he delivered at the John Randolph Club called A Strategy for the Right. If you look that up, Murray Rothbard, A Strategy for the Right, you'll just love it because you can tell it would be a great speech. It also has a lot of learning in it, but it's also very punchy. Like he defends, maybe people won't remember this, especially you youngsters here, but Pete and I will remember that National Review had a long 40,000-word essay they published by Bill Buckley called In Search of Anti-Semitism. And of course, when you're in search of anti-Semitism, you find it everywhere. So they found it in the Nation magazine. They found it in Joe Sobran. They found it in Pat Buchanan. Whatever. They found it in Gore Vidal, whatever it was. And so most of those people defended themselves, but Rothbard in A Strategy for the Right just smashes Buckley and smashes National Review. So it's very, very satisfying to read. I mean, he was especially toward the end of his life, he was very, very much a man of the right. And he hung around, let's just say he hung around with a lot of right-wing people.
It's also, we should also
So-
point out that as will become clear if you read the book, Rothbard is of course interested in economic libertarianism, free markets, and the like. But one of his primary motivating factors is the anti-war position, which is one of the key threads that links the contemporary right wing to Rothbard and all the way back to the old right. And this is actually relevant now, in addition to some of the similar political maneuverings we were talking about in the beginning, with what I'd call like the fake right. We also have this condition right now where the U.S. is sort of vaguely threatening, war with Venezuela, which seems to always be the sort of fallback position of a state that just needs to, distract from whatever failures are happening. If something's not going exactly as you want to, just start a war. And I've been signaling against supporting the war in Venezuela. I'm hoping overall if you read this book, it might help you adopt the same position and maintain this sort of anti-war tradition of the right wing. I do think that is really important, that the sort of MAGA base does not fall into, just supporting a war in Venezuela if that's what Trump decides to do. Again, this is a little more political than we normally get on these, but obviously the point of reading this is to make these connections to the present.
Right. Indeed. And I'm happy to make those connections. We might note, by the way, that when we read this book, we have to bear in mind that American society was very different in the time period that Rothbard is going to spend a lot of time talking about. Nobody thought a man could become a woman. Like even the left, the official left, at least had some basic common sense. In the 1950s, people on the left at least knew how to dress and behave and speak and, were literate and educated in a classical sense. So when you read this book, it might seem like, well, some of the issues he's talking about are a little passé, or they're not quite the issues we're talking about today. No, they weren't, because he lived in a saner society. So it's not like immediately applicable. We can draw a lot of lessons from this, but there certainly is a lot to be learned about purges on the right. Certainly that there's plenty of that, and there is a lot about war. And I realized that during the Cold War, we all felt, I'm speaking for myself, felt like, well, that's an exception. We have, even Pat Buchanan, we don't want to have a warfare state, but, we have the Soviet Union. But now, after having lived through that and seen that it never goes away, that it's not like, well, we'll just have this thing, we'll get rid of the Soviets, and then we'll get rid of it. You never get rid of it. Well, in retrospect, now you look back at it and you say, maybe this could have been avoided. Maybe we didn't have to do this. Maybe the Soviet Union overextending itself by, like, I don't care if the Soviets take over some of these African countries that can barely function. Like, that would be a drain on them. That's not a benefit. Who cares who's running Chad? Let them do it if they want to. I think you're more likely to come to that conclusion now that you see that the warfare state that was created during that time has gone completely out of control, and it seems like it can never be reined in. So maybe don't have it to start with.
Well, I think one of the things that a lot of us will say once you come to the realization that war is going to happen, but if it has to happen, get it over with. You end up killing 2 million people in Vietnam. You could have just started the war by carpet bombing Hanoi and turning it into a parking lot. That'd be less death than the whole thing. And then you have 10 years of just get it over with. If Putin wanted, what's happening in Ukraine now? Putin should have went in and just leveled Kiev. Get it over with. You don't have to sit there and grind it out for years and years and years and lose everyone. If you're going to lose 1 million people, just get it done right away. Come on. There's no reason to, if you have to go to war, just go to war to win right away. And because basically once it goes beyond a couple months, now it's just people getting rich. Now it's just, what Eisenhower warned us about. If you're going to go to war to win. The United States basically went to Vietnam. They kicked ass for like 10 years in the battles, but then they lost the war politically. It's like, I mean, how do you allow this to happen? Just win. Just get it over with.
Well, maybe you know this, Pete, but I've had Pat on the show a few times. It was just his birthday the other day, by the way. He turned 87. Let me say in parentheses that, did you see the James Lindsay post on Twitter about how it's a virtue signal to wish Pat Buchanan a happy birthday? And that the kind of people doing that, well, they're telling us who they are. Like, oh my gosh, will you just
Well,
stop?
yeah, we are. I am telling you who I am.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. But the guy's a dope. But I had the good fortune of having Pat on the Tom Wood Show a few times. And once I said to him, look, the Vietnam War went on for a very long time. And I personally believe it helped to fuel the counterculture in the U.S., which was immensely destructive of things that Pat and I assume all of us, genuinely cherish. And it contributed to that, and it gave fuel to it. And I said, and the thing is, okay, so the U.S. ended up not winning that war, but the world did not come to an end. The communism did not spread all over the place. What if the U.S., instead of damaging the middle class standard of living by funding this crazy thing through inflation and fueling the Cultural Revolution, what if it had just said, we can't solve every problem. We can't, not possible, wouldn't be desirable to try. Wouldn't that have been better? And I am telling you guys, it is one of my proudest podcasting moments. I came within this I had Pat thinking about it, came within this close of having him say, well, maybe that wouldn't have been so bad if we had gone that route. I'm not going to get Pat Buchanan in a half-hour episode of the Tom Wood Show, who wrote speeches for Nixon during that time, to come completely over to my way of looking at things. But, well, when you put it that way, maybe it would have been better to just not do it. And it was started by the left-wing intelligentsia, too, the left liberal intelligentsia. It wasn't like right-wingers started that thing.
So I'll mute out again, and reset it again.
Maybe I'll just switch mics while I'm at it.
So along that, and I think I actually have a excerpt from the book on this whole period and the left-wing intelligentsia and the intelligence state starting things that we probably shouldn't have been in to begin with. I think that is directly mentioned. But just to launch us directly into the book for our producer, I think this should be screenshot 7 from Rothbard's direct introduction, sort of him explaining the book. And I'll read through this very quickly because it's a very good overview. At the present time, many conservatives have come to realize that the old feisty anti-government spirit of conservatives has been abraded and somehow been transformed into its status opposite. It is tempting, and so far as it goes, certainly correct, to put the blame on the right's embrace in the 1970s of Truman-Humphrey Cold War liberals calling themselves neoconservatives, and to allow these ex-Trotskyites and ex-Mensheviks not only into the tent, but also to take over the show. But the thesis of this book is that those who wonder what happened to the good old cause must not stop with the neocons, that the rot started long before with the founding in 1955 of National Review and its rapid rise to dominance of the conservative movement. It was National Review that consciously and cleverly transformed the content of the old right into something very like its opposite, while preserving the old forms and rituals such as lip service to the free market and to the Constitution of the United States. It was, as the great Garrett said about the New Deal in The American Polity, a revolution within the form. As this book points out, the right happened to be vulnerable to takeover at this time, its old leaders recently dead or retired. While younger or yuppie conservatives may puzzle at this statement, the good old days of the old right in politics were not the Goldwater campaign, but the campaign of Robert A. Taft. So, just as a very basic overview for the audience, this is a pretty radical statement. A lot of people now, I think especially due to backlash to the Iraq War, know about the neocons. They've heard the neocons are bad. The neocons tried to take over everything. They were let in by the right, sort of similar to what the online right has to deal with today, with the left me liberals suddenly getting large audiences and directing people in their towards their topics. But what Rothbard is saying here is that decades really before the neoconservatives took over the right, there was the National Review, and as we'll talk about, some other maybe intelligence interests that pushed that to the forefront, that really sort of transformed the right wing. That is, the right wing from the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s is very different from the right wing afterwards, even though they use roughly the same labels or maybe talk about roughly the same things. It's a completely different group of people.
Yeah, it was completely obliterated, the right wing. I think one of the things we can realize now that was not apparent to Rothbard, and we sort of owe Rothbard a lot for, and much of the people who are trying to, maintain the old right, we owe them for this, for figuring this out through, all of these failures, is that there was no real right wing in the post-war era. It was gone. It was completely obliterated and had to be rebuilt from scratch. And Rothbard is going around, sort of trying to find the anti-statists who are left in the right or the left, and there were none anywhere. It wasn't an option. In retrospect, you really just have, two sides in the Cold War. You have like the Trotskyist left and the Stalinist left operating through the United States and through the Soviet Union, and there was no anti-statist option. Today we can see, I think it's very clear that there are really just two sides here, and this realizing what the sides are lets you put aside certain ideological priors and figure out who your friends and who your enemies are. And the two sides, the way I see it, are really just, you have what we call, some people call it gay race communism, basically, versus heritage America. And whether or not you are anti-statist, anti-war, libertarian, whatever, it doesn't matter. You can identify based on that who wants to grind your society into a powder. Go back, listeners, to the beginning of the stream where we talk about what is an American when we read Albion Seed and whatever. That's the key recognition, I think, is where what we see Rothbard doing throughout much of this book is just trying to figure out how to bring about an anti-statist, anti-war ideology, but the sort of ideological approach does not really work in the paradigm he was in, because that was not a side that existed, right? That position was simply completely not viable. But now we can understand that rather than take ideological positions per se, we first need to figure out who just wants to destroy our way of life completely, and then we can mobilize against them in a big coalition. And so, yeah, that was sort of my overall takeaway from the book.
First of all, I'm trying out now the built-in microphone. Is it acceptable?
Okay. Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, of course, a central figure in all this is Bill Buckley. Now, when I was a young kid, like high school, Bill Buckley had a TV show on public television, Firing Line, and he would have somebody on, and they would have a discussion, which was sometimes a debate. He had Ron Paul on, for example. And they used to do something, by the way, hosted by left liberal Michael Kinsley from the New Republic, where they would have 3-on-3 debates. It would be Buckley versus some other intellectual, and then the second person, maybe it might be one politician on each side, and then a Hollywood actor on each side. Because I remember Dennis Weaver up against Charlton Heston, and it would be 3-on-3. And I have to say, those were great. And I suggested that when Judge Napolitano got his Freedom Watch TV show, that he should have resurrected that, because nobody was doing that on TV. Nobody. That would have been great. Neocons against, America Firsters or something. And nobody took me up on that, but I think that was a good idea. But anyway, I didn't realize he was a bad guy. When you're 15 years old, he's like the best guy you've ever seen. He's suave and debonair, and he's got this crazy vocabulary. He used to sell a Buckley word-a-day calendar. You have a word-a-day calendar, and there, it's words like precocious, or nefarious. Buckley's is like hemi-demi semiquaver, like bizarre words you would never use in a million years. But so he would like intimidate his opponents because of all this. I didn't realize until I. Oh, did we lose me?
You're phasing in and out slightly.
Yeah, but again, I don't know why this is, because I use this equipment all the time. But anyway, while I'm on camera, I will say that I didn't realize there was a problem with him. And then I found out about the various purges. Now, these purges may look somewhat minor to us today because we've had much more significant ones, but he did, the right wing was not really organized before the 1950s. There were no institutions or think tanks, or maybe there was a publication like the American Mercury, maybe, but there wasn't really an organized movement. So therefore, because there wasn't one, there was nobody purging anybody or disciplining anybody or waving an accusing finger at anybody. But with Buckley, it became, well, we can't have the John Birchers because they're crazy. But it was more, they were opposed to the Vietnam War because they felt like it was the U.S. following treaty obligations that it shouldn't have had. So they had like their own oddball reason for being against the Vietnam War. But that was the thing they couldn't abide. They could have maybe lived with them if it weren't for that. So that was what got them out. And then, as Rothbard tells the story, the non-interventionists were kind of condescended to, and John T. Flynn, who had written the first great critical biography of Franklin Roosevelt, called The Roosevelt Myth in 1949, #2 New York Times bestseller, had written an article saying, look, I think we're going down the wrong path here with the approach to the Soviet Union. And Buckley writes him a little condescending letter and says, no way we're publishing that. So, and then the Ayn Randians. You might say, well, the Ayn Randians are all irritating, which they are. They're all humorless. They have no children. They're robots. I can't understand the appeal of being in an objectivist group. But, I have to admit, I have kind of a soft spot for her. When you read her nonfiction essays, I just feel like she so demolished her opponents. It was entertaining to watch. And then I love the story where apparently Mises, Ludwig von Mises, speaking about Ayn Rand, having read Atlas Shrugged, said something like, Ayn Rand, I forget how exactly he worded it, but it was something like, this is the best man we have fighting the bad guys out there, the interventionists and the evil people and the socialists. And she said, did he really say man? And he had said man. And for some reason, this thrilled her. So I don't know. I have a soft spot for her. I realize that there is something of the devil in her. I get it. But the point is, Buckley could look the other way at far worse things than Ayn Rand and Atlas Shrugged later on. But so he was somebody punishing the deviants. And it kind of created a precedent now, because now, if you look on Twitter, you will find some people saying, in this age where more and more people are Buchananites, where is our Bill Buckley? Because remember, Buckley wrote, as I said, that essay against anti-Semitism as an attempt to purge Buchanan. And Rothbard said at the time, it's not working anymore. People still love Pat Buchanan. Buckley used to be able to send people away with a wave of his hand, and it's not working anymore. Well, that I think is very applicable to today, because the excommunications don't seem to work as effectively. If Mark Levin says, hey, you're not part of this movement, nobody says, oh, well, I had been following Tucker Carlson, but now that Mark Levin says I better not. That doesn't work. And that's a very encouraging thing.
Well, I think one of the issues, I think one of the issues is that, Donald Trump just came in and took the game board and threw it up in the air. And I mean, now you have what's a growing far right. And when I say far right, I'm including a lot of the MAGA people. And the only reason I would say that, even put them in that camp, is many of them are open to a president who would be like an Article 2 president. Someone who would be like, I'm going to destroy the managerial state. I will destroy your enemies for you. Now, is that Donald Trump? Probably not. I mean, he seems to be a little more concerned with what will be a big part of this whole thing is, back then they were canceling you for being an anti-Semite, and wow, nothing has really changed at all, has it? Yeah. Now they'll try, but it's like, well, you can't. But so Trump just basically upset the apple cart so much that there is no gatekeeping. Doesn't work, because where are you gatekeeping people out of? Tom started a podcast. and his podcast is insanely popular. I started a podcast because Tom started a podcast. Jay Burden started a podcast. Jay Burden says that Tom inspired him because I inspired Jay Burden. And it's like, now it's just, they can't control us. They can try to get us kicked off of our platforms and everything, but even that doesn't work anymore. So, I mean, we're in a new world here. And so why is there no Buckley? Well, there's no one smart enough. Who's it going to be? Jonah Goldberg?
Yeah.
Is it Mark Levin? Is it James Lindsay? Or basically what it seems to be is all of those the left us leftists who come in and immediately try to take over the movement because, we know better than you. Everything should be, classical liberalism. I remember James Lindsay saying a couple of years ago, classical liberalism is the only thing that's going to defeat the left, and classical liberalism hasn't even started yet. And I'm like, that's why people make fun of you and call you Corky.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, I totally hear that. And of course, Rothbard died in January 1995. And so he didn't live to see anything like what we have. I mean, he was excited by even the tiniest indication that things might be turning around, like the founding of the John Randolph Club, which was like Lou and Murray plus the Paleocons. And that was a great time. I mean, I was there. Like I'm kind of like a lingering thread to those old days. That was where I met Paul Gottfried and Clyde Wilson, and for that matter, Jared Taylor, all the way back in 1993. And Rothbard was very excited that, okay, now we've got some right-wingers who agree with me that we've got to put a lid on this warfare state. But geez, could you imagine how he would feel seeing like a Dave Smith having the reach he has and some of these other guys having the reach they have? And I mean, it makes me sad because I think, imagine if they'd been able to host him on their shows. I don't want to go down this road because I'm going to be sad, but geez, how things have changed. And the way that they've changed is in a way that precisely solves some of the issues that Rothbard saw, which was, I mean, he was happy that Buckley's excommunications didn't work anymore, but I mean, they still kind of worked because National Review was a very, very big deal in those days. I mean, it was like the right-wing magazine. Like there was never any real competition for that. And now, who could have anticipated a world where nobody reads magazines? Like 30 years later, nobody reads magazines. I mean, I like getting a physical copy of Chronicles in the mail because I want to hold something in my hands. Like I don't think I'm the only one, but basically nobody reads them. And now, what a world that is. What happens now? At the same time, politically, if Nick Fuentes endorses a presidential candidate, that is still not helpful. We're not at a point in 2025 where somebody could ride that to victory. So there is that we should bear in mind. But it's a world Rothbard with his manual typewriter. It was him and a typewriter against the world. Couldn't have anticipated.
Well, we live in a world where, I'll hand it over to you in a second, Ryan. We live in a world that probably 10 minutes from now or 20 minutes from now, Dave Smith is going to drop an episode of his podcast that Tucker Carlson guests on. And the neocons and all of their children are going to lose their minds.
Yeah.
They're just going to go crazy. And it's the best thing ever because there's nothing they can do. There's nothing they can do.
Yeah. No, I know. It's yeah, there is, and we all know it's going to be watched way more than anything they would ever put out. It's amazing. Everything's upside down on its head. But let's say something though about, I mean, I want to say a couple things here, or at least mention that when Rothbard was really in the wilderness in the 1960s, because he doesn't live in an age of the internet. So, and he's basically not allowed to write for National Review. Well, what else does he have? So he starts his own publications. He starts Left and Right, and then he starts the Libertarian Forum. But these are a pittance compared to the reach National Review has. So in the 60s, he feels like he has to form an alliance. Now, we don't need quote unquote alliances quite so much anymore, because anybody can start a website, anybody can start a podcast. You can do whatever you want. It's not like, well, there's one magazine, so I better make an alliance with them. We don't need this as much. But he reached out to the left. And for a little while, he actually saw that he was making, like, there were some people on the left who thought, actually, this guy has some pretty good ideas. But in the book, he says, now, look, this was just a mistake. I mean, number one, you cannot educate these people. And number two, when they have a well-organized movement of long standing, and we have a very new movement of very few people, which does not have an ongoing educational aspect, our guys are going to be lost to the other side. And that was just a mistake, and I shouldn't have done it. To me, I can't believe you would ever say, well, leftism looks really attractive, I think I better switch. I can't imagine that. But that, you look back on that and you think, okay, he really was against the warfare state, and the left was against the Vietnam War. But geez, I have to say, that's the one blot. Like, I look back on Rothbard's record and I feel like that's embarrassing. Like, these people are semi-Maoist. He shouldn't be cavorting with them. That was dumb.
Right, and this is something that I was really gathering when I was rereading through this, was that I've only ever known an age of digital media. I do not know what it's like to be isolated in terms of information. So I'd basically, as soon as I had heard of the Institute and found out about this book, I immediately was given the line that this was an obvious mistake. Rothbard shouldn't have done it. But I've started to guess, I guess I've gained the original nuance of, like, there wasn't many other options, and it was a very lonely, lonely time period for Rothbard.
Right. Yeah, I mean, right. I mean, I suppose it really, being in his situation, where his movement is so small, like, we're talking about like 100 people. I mean, I should maybe show him a little bit more grace. In that situation, he wants to speak. He wants his ideas out there somewhere. These people have an audience that he can talk to. I don't know. Maybe I should be more generous to him.
Right. So, just for the audience, since we've jumped around on the subject, it might be, I'm just going to give a very brief overview now, because I don't think we need to deliberate on specific sources that Rothbard was drawing from. So we've talked about, there's this anti-New Deal coalition called the Old Right, of specific politicians, specific people that were in Congress and had political office power in elite theory terms. I'll just summarize. Rothbard makes a very convincing and I think correct, if you read primary sources from the era, point that the main thinkers that American politicians were looking towards, this anti-New Deal coalition, eventually were people like H.L. Mencken, Albert J. Nock, very radical individualists, anarchists even, as Mencken was labeled, and I believe as Nock called himself. This was a form of individualist anarchism. That's an actual word from the time period. It's a phrase. Originally, they would have been seen as on the left, say in World War I and in the early interwar. This was seen as sort of like a semi-left-wing ideology by the time period. And it was as Rothbard says, it was the GOP's right that was very statist, Hamiltonian, and interventionist. However, with the advent of FDR and the New Deal, most of these major intellectual figures, these great writers from the 20s and World War I, who had previously been in cahoots with various other anti-war leftists, found themselves against FDR for roughly the same reasons they were against this very statist version of the GOP. So that's like the very broad overview. This is like the intellectual origins of the old right. It's not really the based and trad authoritarians that Rothbard would call them. It was these very much homegrown intellectuals in America, Nock, Mencken, people that you could not really find in any other country or tradition, that formed the basis for this old right. And they were individualists, very extremely anarchists even. So if there was any conversations or points that you all wanted to make from perhaps that first half of the book, I figured I would give the audience the overview so they could keep up.
Well, this isn't from the first half of the book, but those, I guess, based and trad authoritarians, actually do come up later in alliance with Buckley, of course, which is kind of a strange parallel to today as well, where you have these Catholic monarchists sort of allying with the fake right, the gatekeeper of Buckley. Now, not obviously, several of us are Catholics, so I'm not saying like this is a Catholic tendency or something, but you do see a sort of strange parallel where there is a lot of criticism in our modern right of the Catholic Church and of Catholics' tendency to ally more with this sort of, I don't want to say open borders per se type of ideology, but this idea that, the more important thing is the Catholic religion, and this crosses borders, and it doesn't really matter if these people are coming in from the South and they're Catholic, then this is okay. It's not a big problem, right? It's fine. So I thought that was like an interesting parallel, although that is jumping ahead a little bit. Sorry.
Well, you're referring to the post-liberals and the integralists, perhaps.
Yeah,
Adrian Vermeil,
exactly. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we can name him if you want to.
Well, I mean, it was just I think he's explicitly advocating for that. Dr. Woods, it looks like you might have a thought on that.
Well, not so much on that, but on the first half of the book, I would say, again, there are some books from that period that are worth reading today, like by people listening to this, that it would be worthwhile. You would not regret reading. I'll give you an example of one that I think is very much worth reading. But before I give the example, I want to say that you'll put it down and say, this reads like it's from a bygone era. Like, I bet if we read even something from the 60s, like The Conscience of a Conservative by Barry Goldwater, which was ghost written for him, but supposed to be by Barry Goldwater, we would read that and say, this sounds like we don't even talk about these issues anymore. Or he was against the Civil Rights Act. Maybe not exactly on the full grounds that we would be against it, but better than nothing. I mean, like, it's took some guts to be against it on any grounds whatsoever. But if you read, like, the book I'm thinking of is called The People's Pottage by, I know I'm supposed to say Garrett Garrett, but I refuse to say that. I like to say Garrett Garrett. The People's Pottage consists of 3 essays that he wrote and about the domestic and international aspects of the New Deal. And he has a very Ernest Hemingway style, even though he's a nonfiction writer, although Garrett Garrett wrote novels too. But that book, it's written so beautifully, and it's nobody has his prose style. He was an amazing writer. He wrote for the Saturday Evening Post, and he tells the story so convincingly, and you see the problems with the New Deal. Now, it's not like an Austrian economic analysis of the New Deal, but it's basic common sense. These are the problems, and this is where we're headed. And his first essay in there is called "The Revolution Was," which is a really hard thing for people to accept. That, in effect, he was saying, he wasn't using the word conservative or right wing, because that people didn't talk that way in those days. But he was saying that, in effect, there are conservatives out there who think they're holding back a revolution that's coming down the road. But what they don't understand is the revolution has occurred already, and it's already down that way. It's already passed. And now we have to cope with the fact that a revolution has occurred in our country and in our system of government and our society, and we have to figure out how to deal with that. And so he would not have thought of himself as conserving anything. His whole point was, they already did this to us. So now we have to think about how to change that. Not how to, make 3% modifications around the edges. But it's brilliantly written. But again, he's not thinking about things like the issues that we talk about today, like what should the right wing's priorities be? Because he's not facing the issues that we're facing. He's not facing psychotic, single, never married, liberal, college-educated women who are a big problem because their minds are filled with complete idiocy. He wasn't dealing with that. So therefore, his books don't talk about that. But there's still a lot of value in it to see that there were people at the time who said, this whole thing has to go. It's not that we have to make peace with it. This whole thing has to go, and here's why. And he also deals with the international stuff, with foreign interventionism, which, of course, we know that is off the table, or at least respectable opinion says it's off the table. They might allow us to be critical of some of the New Deal domestic programs, but that's as far as it goes. We all know Franklin Roosevelt was a hero in how he waged World War II. So, if you're a dissident, you got to read The People's Pottage by Garrett Garrett, and then secondarily, and much lower on the list, you probably should read The Roosevelt Myth by John T. Flynn, because later on, people like Newt Gingrich thought Franklin Roosevelt was one of our greatest presidents. Ronald Reagan complimented Franklin Roosevelt all the time. This was not how the right wing used to be. Now, John T. Flynn is not as good as he might be because for some reason he was a partisan of Herbert Hoover, who wasn't that much better than FDR. Although long after his death, we did get Freedom Betrayed, which was the posthumous publication of Herbert Hoover's book about the disastrous foreign policy of the 1930s and World War II, which makes Hoover a billion times better than Franklin Roosevelt. But anyway, I think you should read those two books. I know we all have a lot of books to read, but we should know a little bit of our own history. And in the course of learning our own history, we're learning about some bad guys, which we should know too.
So
yes, a lot more of the people the standard and historical instruction we get in our education system, a lot of the people were taught to lionize, I guess pretty much every president, at least since Roosevelt. There's actually very little to lionize about them. And this is a serious problem to grapple with. On this note, I was listening to the Joe Rogan podcast with Elon Musk, only because Pete told me to, by the way. And Rogan asked Musk if he thought the system was reformable, and Musk actually affirmed that it was fundamentally unreformable. And of course, this is the point that R.N. McIntyre pushes a lot with the Civil Rights Act. There's still a tendency among a lot of, I guess, the well-meaning right wing that, we just need certain reforms in place to deal with what, what Musk calls the woke mind virus. But the real issue is, Civil Rights Act is to now as New Deal was to Rothbard then. Like, the whole thing has to go. And actually, as Yarvin points out, it is actually much easier to reset, get rid of the whole thing, rather than try and reform your way out of it, especially when, let's face it, the only real reason we're in any position now to not be gatekept out of every single part of right-wing politics is simply because of Donald Trump, right? And a few people have, started to pick up that torch, like Tucker Carlson. But, that's really the one thing that's even allowing us to be in the position right now to organize it all. So it's very important that this message doesn't just, fade into history and then it gets picked up 50 years from now, like we're doing now with Rothbard and the New Deal. Like, all of our people have got to understand that the whole thing has to go. The whole civil rights regime that we're living under is the problem. There is no reforming it. It has to be repealed. People, and this is not a weird recognition, our predecessors recognized this about about what they were living under. And, you have to realize that we're not preventing our defeat. We've already been defeated, and now we're trying to cope with it and trying to get ourselves back to something new, right? It's not that we're fighting a war so we don't lose it. The war has been lost already. It's been lost several times by several generations of right-wingers, and we have to focus on not trying to prevent what's already from happening. Anyway.
Well,
something that's... Oh, sorry, you first.
Well, I was going to say, Rothbard doesn't talk a lot in this book, if at all, about the civil rights revolution, which is happening at this time. I mean, like, he even was he was interested in the Black Power movement because he thought maybe there was some libertarianism in it or something. This is also not his finest moment. but that, I didn't realize when I was younger just how awful the civil rights revolution has been, because it touches everything, and it corrupts everything, and it wends its way into every nook and cranny of society. And it does this while singing sweet words about equality that appeal to dumb people. And so that makes it hard to fight against, but it corrupts the law completely. It corrupts the courts completely. I mean, introducing stuff like disparate impact and whatever. These are standards that can never be satisfied. So therefore, all standards you might want to establish in society can be challenged by this. So it is satisfying to me that I do see people on the right starting to figure that out. The problem is the general public is educated in these these dummy making factories, where you there's no way you could even have this conversation with them because they're too dumb and propagandized. So you would have to do an end run around it you wouldn't be able to repeal the Civil Rights Act of 1964. You'd just have to defang it at every turn. You'd have to make sure that disparate impact is and remains suppressed and abolished, and that such and such words mean such and such. I don't think you could do the backlash would be so overwhelming, and 95% of people wouldn't even understand what it was you were doing, but they would think it was unthinkable. It would be very hard to do, but we recognize how damaging it's been for education, for personal safety, for the very idea of merit and standards. So it needs to be hit at from every possible angle, even if it can't be expressly repealed.
Yeah, no, that's very good. That is something that I always found to be a glaring oversight, perhaps, in this was that Rothbard seems to.
I think it's because he was so concerned about foreign policy, and maybe because,
right.
I mean, he was writing a lot of this in the 70s, and I think the full effects and implications of the Civil Rights Revolution had not become completely manifest to him at that point. But also, I think he might have been hoping that there would be some left liberals who might be interested in what he had to say, and that would just be a non-starter. But who knows?
Yeah.
Well, I think by the time the Rothbard Rockwell report came around, he was definitely had full on embraced the fact that the Civil Rights Act we were seeing what the Civil Rights Act wrought.
Yeah,
it was becoming abundantly clear on TV.
And can I tell you that being a college student in the early 90s and being able to receive physical copies of the Rothbard Rockwell report in the mail, that was a wonderful thing. I tore that thing open and read it the first day. Rothbard was just so good at that, and Lou was unleashed. I mean, it really anticipated, I think, a lot of the internet commentary today on the right by decades. Like, they were way ahead of their time. It was those issues were so fantastic. So there was nothing like it anywhere.
I mean, most of the serious online organizations will look at the Triple R as like a sort of prototype or the gold standard even for what they're doing. I know that there's a lot of people within our own organization that view it that way, not just me, certainly. So something that I thought that was very interesting when we were talking about Roosevelt, usually ranked among the greatest presidents, and all these people will bow down to him because of his war stance. I find very interesting. If our producer could pull up screenshot 21, because this is a very important point, as Dr. Woods was alluding to. Rothbard focuses a lot on intervention. I'll just read very quickly through these highlighted paragraphs, because the war, World War II, the good war, is sort of like the founding myth for Roosevelt's cult, if you will. So Rothbard writes, and yet, in a few short years, the ranking of isolationism on the ideological spectrum was to undergo a sudden and dramatic shift. In the late 1930s, the Roosevelt administration moved rapidly towards war in Europe and the Far East. As it did so, and especially after war broke out in September 1939, the great bulk of the liberals and the left flip-flopped drastically on behalf of war and foreign intervention. Gone without a trace was the old left's insight into the evils of the Versailles Treaty, the Allied dismemberment of Germany, and the need for revision of the treaty. Gone was the old opposition to American militarism and to American and British imperialism. Not only that, but to the liberals and left, the impending war against Germany and even Japan became a great moral crusade, a people's war for democracy, and against fascism, outrivaling in the absurdity of their rhetoric the very Wilsonian apologia for World War I that these same liberals had repudiated for 2 decades. And skipping just a little, which talks about what we were just on. Still worse was the attitude of these new interventionists towards those erstwhile friends and allies who continued to persist in their old beliefs. These latter were now castigated and denounced day in and day out with extreme bitterness and venom as reactionaries, fascists, anti-Semites, and followers of the Goebbels line. Joining with great enthusiasm in this smear campaign was the Communist Party and its allies from the collective security campaign of the Soviet Union in the late 1930s, and again after the Nazi attack of Russia on June 22nd, 1941. So this is something that was very obvious at the outbreak of the war, was that FDR's cult, which was originally quite shaky, even though the electoral maps don't bear it out, the New Deal was far from universally accepted. It had a lot of opposition. It was really with the war, and then as America entered the war, just direct suppression by the FDR regime against the old right that sort of got these anti-interventionists, these isolationists, former left and consistent right-wingers, really got them out of the public sphere, cut them off from the information channels, which once again were very centralized. And sort of cemented this new warfare state into the American conscience. It was as Rothbard writes, you were anti-Semitic or a Nazi if you were against intervening or against supplying everyone.
Yeah, so I guess it really is true, as Pete said. Things haven't changed a whole heck of a lot. And of course, today, if you even talk the wrong way about World War II, we already know all about you. And it's so funny to watch these people on their fainting couches when we're talking about books that were, A.J.P. Taylor was a pretty mainstream historian. We're talking about books that have been around a long time. It's not like we invented them there's been a tradition of World War II revisionism, and so what? So what? The cartoonish way we are supposed to interpret everything. The Zionist movement, the Zionists in America. When you think about the way the wars on terror have been portrayed to us, they're all cartoons. Every last one of them is a cartoon. And so why would it be a surprise? World War II also has to be a cartoon. At least 50 million dead, but there was no possible way that could have been made better. There was no scenario better than 50 million deaths. And if you're trying to think about one, there's something wrong with you. But I think if you're not trying to think about one, there would be something wrong with you.
Yeah, well, what's funny too is the state has been using the exact same propaganda techniques since that period. And as our friend, T777 like to say, the only thing the American government knows how to do now is fight the Cold War, and we're still fighting the Cold War with the Russians. And if you criticize that war, it's honestly just as bad as, or at least close to as bad as, criticizing or revising World War II. Like, you have to absolutely despise Russia and want to, give Ukraine all the missiles in existence so they can fight the Russians for some reason. And if you, are against that, you love Putin or something. And also, it's awesome that, millions of Ukrainians are dead and there's no other possible outcome that could have happened. Like, that's literally the best we could do. And they go on the TV or whatever. I don't watch the TV, wherever they go, the New York Times, and they're like, oh, we're winning the war, guys. Russia's getting defeated. And it's like, but I could just go watch a YouTube video every single day that shows actually the opposite is happening. It's weird when we're in an environment now where you have open access to information that completely factually contradicts all the propaganda, but they're still using the exact same propaganda techniques.
Right.
But I guess in large part, do they work? Maybe they're the smart ones, because it isn't stopping them, are they? We're still fighting the war in Ukraine.
Well, Well, and they're still, by using the same propaganda techniques, they're just fighting. If we say, oh, the U.S. government is just still fighting the Cold War, and it is. I mean, they are. Then, I mean, that doesn't work anymore. That's why that's why when you read an Army War College paper and it says if the United States Army had been the Ukrainian army, it would have been devastated in a month and a half. So it's like, well, what are we doing here? Why are we? And they still use the same techniques, even in rhetoric, and they just don't work anymore. You have people who will just blatantly lie and make stuff up, pure Hasbara on X, and within an hour it's debunked. And nobody believes it. It's like we've been saying recently, it's like the only way Israel could possibly get back the American public is, and especially the young people, is maybe through a false flag. But no one would believe it. They couldn't even do a false flag now. We would be like, oh, that's a false flag. Israel did it. I mean, there are people, half the people, I see normie streams where people say Israel killed Charlie Kirk. And I'm like, what the hell is going on here? Nobody believes anything anymore that is coming from the mainstream, even if it's true, even if it might be true.
Yeah, and it's true that they haven't adapted to the new situation.
Tom, your mic went out. Can't hear you.
You can't?
I think you're back now.
Yeah, got you now. You're back.
Okay. All right. We had to have one more issue. They have not adapted to the new situation. They really thought that they could just go on talking about the special relationship with Israel. America stands with Israel. Everybody could just be Mike Pence forever, and everybody who's an opponent is an anti-Semite or a terrorist sympathizer, or do you denounce Hamas and all that. They just thought this was how they were going to win because they didn't have to worry about opponents. They could just be, they could argue in a way that would be an insult to a fifth grader forever. And now suddenly it's so hollow, it's laughable. When you hear the dumb slogans over and over and over, our special ally in the Middle East and all this stuff. I mean, you just, and the thing is, they might have gotten away with it for a little longer if the way they conducted themselves wasn't such an affront to any reasonable American patriot. I mean, seeing dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of American congressmen stupidly posing with Netanyahu in Israel, that's an insult. I mean, we have issues in our own country here. Or smearing people, AIPAC smearing good, decent Americans. Because why? Because they're not campaigning on expropriating Americans enough for a foreign country? Like, no patriot can sit back and say, oh, that's good and normal. Or you get called an anti-Semite just for using the term America First. Ben Shapiro called that an anti-Semitic slogan in 2015 and 16. At some point, an American patriot has to say, I'm sorry, but American patriotism does not involve bending over and grabbing my ankles. Like this cannot go on. If they could have just conducted themselves semi-normally and not with this crazed, wild, narcissistic insanity, it might have persisted for a while longer. But after a while, I think some people finally just said, you just can't act like this anymore.
So I don't mean to keep cutting off the the conversations or anything. I'm just trying to make sure we hit our hour-and-a-half time frame. This is I think one of the Rothbard mentions that there was a sudden string of deaths of great leaders in the old right that sort of made them weak during a time frame post-war. Something else that's worth mentioning is that although the old right got institutions, they made their own publications, magazines. He mentions for a moment they controlled the National Association of Manufacturers. There were even committees in Congress and multiple congressmen, especially in the House, that were supportive of them. The Republican Party would screw them over, for summary. The Roosevelt-aligned Eastern interests would back Eisenhower over Taft, who was the old right senator, even though many people on the old right thought he was too compromising. For reference, Taft I've only ever heard good things about on the right, so it's an interesting quirk of this book that it actually has some criticism about him. I would like to introduce now on excerpt 44. This is perhaps where our main villain enters. One of these good old right mentors of Rothbard was Frank Chodorov, another one of these individualist anarchists, and very much responsible for, I think, a lot of Rothbard's ideas in politics and philosophy. This is a very interesting excerpt from Rothbard that I think gets underlooked, where he's talking about what happened after Chodorov, basically. And he says Chodorov was now deprived of a libertarian outlet. He had been forced out, basically, in the midst of post-war fervor. His great voice was stilled, and this loss was made final by the tragic illness that struck in 1961, and in which Frank spent the last years of his life. Aggravating the tragedy was his ideological betrayal by close friends, such as young William F. Buckley, whom Frank had discovered as a writer while editing Human Events, and who, in a recent firing line exchange with Karl Hess, dared to bring up the name of the dead Chodorov as a libertarian sanction for his own pro-war stance. Even more poignant is the history of the Intercollegiate Society of Individualists, which Frank had founded in 1952 as a 50-year project to win the college campuses away from statism and towards individualism. In 1956, ISI left the Foundation for Economic Education's offices to take up headquarters in Philadelphia. Frank's selection to succeed him as head of ISI, E. Victor Million, had since taken ISI squarely into the traditionalist conservative camp, even to the extent, at about the time of Frank's death in '66, of changing the name of Chodorov's brainchild to the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. It seems that the name individualist was upsetting conservative businessmen to whom it conjured up visions of the rebels of the New Left. O liberty, what crimes are committed in thy name? So Buckley, and this is after the National Review had been founded, obviously firing line was going. Buckley originally was seen by this old right as one of them, or at least a protege. I think I have another excerpt from Rothbard where he points out he saw almost immediately that was not the case. But you even had these major figures like Frank Chodorov of major institutional power that wanted Buckley and the people around him to be a sort of successor. And this is really kind of where the word betrayal comes in, I think, the most prominently. There are other betrayals listed in this book, certainly, but I think this one's much more personal. But perhaps I'm just too hard on Buckley. That's what I really want. This is why I really wanted to point out. It's sort of after the old right had been kicked out and shunted due to their anti-interventionist stances. This is where you get the betrayal part. This is not just open warfare. This is perhaps fighting from the inside. So, if there's anything there to talk about.
Well, Buckley was a betrayer of friends semi-regularly. I mean, the way he betrayed Joe Sobran, who had been a long-time columnist for National Review, to throw him to the wolves and call him an anti-Semite. You know, that was, of course, years later. That was like 1991 or so. Or no, it might have been 93. I was actually at 93, 94. I was at the John Randolph Club meeting, which occurred about 2 weeks after Buckley accused Sobran of being an anti-Semite, and Sobran was one of the speakers at the John Randolph Club. So he gave a speech called "How I Got Fired by Bill Buckley," and it was absolutely great. It was just incredible to be part of that. But you know, at the same time, some of this verbiage reminds me of, again, that they're not arguing the same kind of issues we're arguing today. Like, even just, I don't want to have a society of individualists. You know, like, I don't feel like what I'm fighting for is individualism versus collectivism. I think that's a false choice. You know, I think that's like middle school libertarianism. You know, I'm not an individualist in any way. You know, I mean, if you mean anti-statist, maybe I am, but an individual, like, I'm not. Like, I'm a family man, you know, so that's a collective. You know, I'm an American. That's a collective. I belong to the local chess club. That's a collective. The point is that these are natural and organic collectives. The objection we have to collectivism is when they are inorganic and fake and constructs of totalitarian regimes, like, you know, like a Soviet citizen or something. That's not a real thing. This thing was invented by some, you know, crazy Bolsheviks. That's not a real thing. And then they force me to be part of it. But so I don't like the framing of we're individualists fighting for individual liberty. Well, yeah, I would like to fight for my rights to do certain things, I guess, but that's just not the way I would ever think of phrasing it. It just seems juvenile to me. So again, I'm probably being unfair. I know that's not the point. It's just that this language grates on me now. I used to love this stuff. And then I hear Intercollegiate Society of Individualists, and I think, ugh, these sound like terrible people. I don't want to hang around with them.
Right, yeah, and it's a past battle. It shouldn't make sense to us right now.
Yeah, right, it is. It's a past battle, right, but it's not where we are now.
Right. So
the word organic is very key there. One of the ways we prevent ourselves from being betrayed by modern Buckley figures is actually gatekeeping. We have the luxury now of gatekeeping because we have our own institutions that we can protect from infiltration. And it's actually, it's a lot easier to do. It's difficult because our movement sort of grew out of this sort of openness to perspectives and, this true idea of free speech. There's this, idea that the right always wins when free speech is allowed. But we're very much in a phase now where we are building our own institutions. And you look at things like the intellectual dark web that formed, and, again, not to harp on him like James Lindsay or even people like Joel Berry, you have to gatekeep our thing, whatever your particular thing, right? We all belong to different groups. Whatever your group is, you actually have to gatekeep it from these people and be much more stringent with who you actually allow to join your group. Because if you don't do that, you are going to get betrayed, like Rothbard did with Buckley. So we have to get used to being the gatekeeper rather than now that we're no longer being gatekept, which is a little counterintuitive and, frankly, I think is a little bit discomforting. I don't think it's not like it's enjoyable to gatekeep people and, stop them because you want to be friendly with people, but that's the reality of politics. And we have to learn to identify which people belong and which people don't. Again, going back to this concept of organic, if a person is not like a natural member of your group, then there's a good chance they don't belong there. Like if they're not naturally an American, and we all understand what that means, there's a good chance that that's a person that needs to be gatekept. If they're not a member, the family came up, right? If they're not actually a member of your family, if someone's trying to come and be like, hey, I'm a member of your family, no, you're not. So I'm going to be very skeptical of that and not let you in, actually.
So speaking of inorganic, I think that we've sort of reached the crescendo, especially looking at the clock. Starting on excerpt 53, we have Rothbard really hammering into the National Review. And I'll get to, I would just like to read this out. It's a little bit just a bunch of words, but I think this is very good for people to hear just everything that Rothbard has on the National Review. I don't know that it can be repeated enough, especially because even though the National Review isn't the big thing anymore, there's a lot of similar things like it that are trying to gatekeep and police us. So I'm sure the audience can draw very obvious inferences, or we will on the panel. So Rothbard says, and so, when National Review was founded with much expertise and financing in late 1955, the magazine was a coming together to direct the newly transformed right wing on the part of two groups: all the veteran ex-communist journalists and intellectuals, and the new group of younger Catholics whose major goal was anti-communism. Thus, the central and guiding theme for both groups in this unholy coalition was the extirpation of communism at home and particularly abroad. Prominent on the new magazine were leading ex-leftists: James Burnham, former Trotskyite; Frank S. Meyer, formerly on the National Committee of the Communist Party and head of its Chicago training school; ex-German communist leader William S. Schlamm; Dr. J.B. Matthews, ex-leftist Max Eastman; ex-communist Ralph de Toledano; former leading German communist theoretician Professor Karl Wittfogel; John Chamberlain, a leading leftist intellectual of the 30s; ex-fellow traveler Eugene Lyons; ex-communist Will Herberg; former communist spy Whittaker Chambers, and a whole slew of others. So we've kind of set up here. There was an old right. It was screwed over pretty heavily by the FDR regime, the Republican Party. And then a whole bunch of their leaders died, as Rothbard said in the introduction. And this is what replaces it. This is just one half. I have the rest if we find it relevant. But this is what passes for the right. Actual communist agents, and in some cases, alleged former ones. James Burnham, who, if I remember correctly, was on the precursor to the CIA, or with the precursor to the CIA. This is who they are. I think that says much more than I could ever say just by listing out what they believed, what they did, or whatever else. You can just know this is who they were. Rothbard's being very objective here. So,
Well,
any discussion?
Look at who we get coming at us now. James Lindsay, academic, postmodern, expert in postmodernism. Dave Rubin, former Young Turks. Jonah Goldberg. Has anybody read a book that he's ever written? It's basically the same thing. It's a bunch of people who, and then you look at Bill Kristol. Bill Kristol has just endorsed Mandami for mayor. It's all ex-leftists, and it's just nothing ever changes. It's all, and then you'll have the Weinstein brothers who, and I think Brett's not a bad guy, but his brother Eric's insane, and all these people who are just, and Jordan Peterson is part of the same crew. Anyone who works at the Daily Wire, I'm sorry, I'm not going to give a pass to the two Catholic guys there that I like, because just leave. You're not going to change it. You're in the wrong camp. It is an Israeli op, just like Breitbart was an Israeli op. And Breitbart actually wrote an article talking about how it was an American organization that was born in Israel. And the picture was all of them with Benjamin Netanyahu. This is nothing. Nothing changes. It's just, at that time, Israel was a very young state, and now they've taken over ours.
We're going to see this problem really rear its head. Well, I won't say very soon, because but the idea is Trump is old, right? And they are waiting for him to pass. They are so eager for that to happen, and to try this exact maneuver and be like, oh, we're MAGA, we're the real successors to MAGA. Ignore our neoconservative background or whatever. We're the true successors to Trump. We love America, and we're going to continue on with the true, Trumpian version of MAGA. I was very happy to see Tucker Carlson interview Marjorie Taylor Greene the other day and just go over what does MAGA actually mean, and he outlined 7 or 8 points about what it meant, because it's really important to understand what the entire Trump movement is about, and not because you're hardcore dedicated to it, but this is the glue that's holding everything together right now, and that's what they're going to try and subvert. It is the absolute prime target for subversion. We see it happening constantly, right? And we've been talking about it the whole time. But once Trump is gone, which inevitably will happen, probably much sooner than we'd like, let's face it, it is going to be an absolute deluge of these people trying to force their way into the head of this movement. And, it's really only figures like Tucker Carlson who will be able to prevent it. It's important in the near future to bridge divides, like he's done a lot on his show, and set the standard that, look, you're not going to gatekeep the right. I'm going to interview Nick Fuentes, and you're all going to be okay with it. And that's just how it's going to be. We have to keep that. It's going to be on us to keep the whole thing together, because the GOP, basically the entire GOP, are the people on this page we're looking at right now. They are the people who are going to try and subvert the entire thing. And there's really just one man right now holding, whatever you think of them, holding that that entire just absolute deluge of subversion.
Dr. Woods, I think you're muted, though. I think that's why people kept jumping in.
No, I'm not. I just muted.
Now you're good.
It's
I'm not actually muted.
Sorry.
Well, you're good now.
All right, thank you. Well, look, I mean, Rothbard and Buchanan had a good relationship, and Pat even said that if he were elected president, he would give Rothbard posthumously in 1996 the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which would have been a pretty nice thing. But I can't help. I mean, look, I campaigned for Pat. Like, I actually knocked on doors in New Hampshire for Pat in 1992. You know how awful it is to knock on the doors of strangers and tell them I'm here to campaign for a political candidate? It sucks. Like that is not fun at all. But I did that for Pat, because I wanted him to win, or at least we wanted to make a splash. But even a guy like me who did that, I didn't appreciate even then how prophetic he was. Because in 1992, yeah, immigration was an issue, but you had to be prescient to see how serious it would be. And he was. And he understood why it's a problem. And it's not just because, they make the schools more crowded or something. Like he understood the whole picture of what was wrong with this. These days we have way more critics of Israel and the U.S. relationship with Israel, way more than we had in Pat's day. Pat was almost entirely alone on that, and that's tough to go up against really, really tough opposition, and he did that. So immigration, the Israel lobby, and the Israel relationship, and then on top of that, just the warfare state in general. I mean, I was all for, in 1990, 91, I was all for that Persian Gulf War. We got to get Saddam, don't you understand? Like, I loved Pat, but I didn't quite, I thought he had maybe some kind of a blind spot. It was only later that I realized that he'd been right about that. And he was great on foreign intervention all after that. It kills me that at the key moment when a well-placed Pat Buchanan speech and column and the good advice of a Pat Buchanan, that he's of advanced age and he's just not in the game anymore.
So just because, once again, we're short on time, and we promised the good Dr. Woods that we would only take an hour and a half of his time. I have just two more things that were absolutely necessary to get through to the audience, and of course, as our recording lingers here forever. So screenshot 55, I think, is perhaps the second most important thing through this, besides just the ideological backgrounds of the National Review. And I'll just read this. Whether it's visible or not, I think is good for people after the fact, not people viewing live. And Rothbard just says this, and it's worth considering. In the light of hindsight, we should now ask whether or not a major objective of National Review from its inception was to transform the right wing from being an isolationist to global warmongering anti-communist movement, and particularly whether or not the entire effort was in essence a CIA operation. We now know that Bill Buckley, for the 2 years prior to establishing National Review, was admittedly a CIA agent in Mexico City, and that the sinister E. Howard Hunt was his control. His sister Priscilla, who had become managing editor of National Review, was also in the CIA. And other editors, James Burnham and Wilmore Kendall, had at least been recipients of CIA largesse in the Anti-Communist Congress for Cultural Freedom. In addition, Burnham had been identified by two reliable sources as a consultant for the CIA in the years after World War II. Moreover, Gary Wills relates in his Memoirs of the Conservative Movement that Frank Meyer, to whom he was close to at the time, was convinced that the magazine was a CIA operation. With his Leninist-trained nose for intrigue, Meyer must be considered an important witness. And he continues, and this is, I think, perhaps the most convincing. Furthermore, it was a standard practice in the CIA, at least in those early years, that no one ever resigned from the CIA. A friend of mine who joined the agency in the early 1950s told me that if, before the age of retirement, he was mentioned as having left the CIA for another job, that I was to disregard it, since it would only be a cover for continuing agency work. On that testimony, the case for National Review being a CIA operation becomes even stronger. And he goes on, and there's many more pages in this book that kind of supports just the inorganic and operative nature of the National Review and Buckley, but I think this is perhaps the most damning. So, any Does that elicit any conversation, or should I perhaps just keep going to the last thing I wanted to get to?
Oh, I think I somehow muted you guys. How did I do that? I was trying to see if I could maximize this thing so I can see it better in my old age here.
Yeah.
Just talk.
And somehow I can't hear any of you guys anymore. That's okay. I'm a good lip reader.
Yeah. Go ahead if you have any.
Yeah, I can't hear anybody. This is not a good platform. I don't know what to tell you. This is not a good platform.
DM him if you want, Pete.
Let's see. Is that?
Okay.
Yeah.
If we can.
Sorry, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Did that
I'll let
help?
you guys sort.
No, I still can't hear you. I'm so sorry, guys, but I don't know what the.
He must have clicked
what the problem is.
He clicked the speaker next to the microphone.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody's talking and I can't hear anybody.
Here, I'll let you guys sort that out. If our producer could, if you could briefly mute him,
No,
I'll just bring up
nothing?
the very. Hello. Oh, okay. Yeah, if our producer could mute him very quickly, Pete, if you can sort that out, I think I'll just bring up the very last time that we have, which is specifically.
Yeah, I apologize.
Which is specifically William F. Buckley's response to a lot of Rothbard's accusations. And this is the very last screenshot that we have in the whole file. So William F. Buckley wrote an obituary for Rothbard soon after he died. I forget the specific time frame. And this is what Buckley had to say. And I'm just going to let his words speak for itself. Buckley sort of libels Rothbard, I would say, throughout most of this, but this last paragraph is a real kicker. He ends his obituary of Rothbard with, "It was a great pity, but his problem ought not to be thought of as tracing to the seamless integrity of libertarian principles. In Murray's case, much of what drove him was a contrarian spirit, the deranging scrupulosity that caused him to disdain such as Herbert Hoover, Ronald Reagan, Milton Friedman, and, yes, Newt Gingrich, while huffing and puffing in the little cloister whose walls he labored so strenuously to contract, leaving him, in the end, not as the father of a swelling movement that roused the masses from their slumber, as he once stated in his ambition, but with about as many disciples as David Koresh had in his little redoubt in Waco. Yes, Murray Rothbard believed in freedom, and yes, David Koresh believed in God." So this is, if you were wondering if Buckley or the National Review ever responded to Rothbard throughout this whole book, this was Buckley's obituary for Rothbard soon after he had died. And I can't think of anything that's aged even more poorly than this has. Can you imagine a right-winger being against Hoover, Reagan, Milton Friedman, and Newt Gingrich? Buckley couldn't, and that was enough to make it into Rothbard's obituary that he wrote for him. So, Pete or Charlie, is there any... Oh, Dr. Woods is back.
All right. We're talking about Ryan. Just give a summary of what you just read.
I just read the last paragraph from Buckley's obituary for Rothbard.
Oh yeah, which is one of the most horrible things imaginable. Like, he couldn't have just said, I guess we officially bury the hatchet now that Murray has gone, and we can acknowledge that he was a great economist with a lot of important things to say. He had an incredible blind spot when it came to the Cold War, but why couldn't you have said that like a normal person?
Well, and I find it interesting as well. This is also the same side to where if anyone online, anon account, big person or whatever, big account with a face, says anything bad about someone after they've died within like 3 months, this is the same group that'll try to excommunicate them. And this is Buckley's obituary for Rothbard.
Yeah. Yeah, it was such a vicious thing to do. I remember it at the time. I mean, I remember getting the email from Lou Rockwell that I remember the subject line was "The Death of Murray and Rothbard," and I was just blown away. I couldn't believe it.
I don't know that I've read a more enraging document in my life, but once again, I have a great affinity for Rothbard. I don't know that.
Oh,
Buckley
wait a
ever-
minute. Just wait. If this doesn't get solved in the next 20, 30 years, wait to see the obituaries for people like Daryl Cooper and Tucker Carlson that these people are going to write. I mean, if they make it, I mean, you know, I was reading a tweet by, there's an account called Awesome Jew.
Oh,
It was
yes, I'm well aware of that account.
It was basically a tweet saying that if violence against Jews in this country ever happens, Tucker Carlson will be the tip of that spear.
Yeah.
And basically what he's calling for people to kill. I mean, I'm sorry, that's exactly what he's doing.
Yeah.
And yeah. I mean, could you imagine? I mean, yeah, Buckley was... I remember there's a video, you can find it, where he's debating Gore Vidal, and Gore Vidal is just smoking him. I mean, just absolutely just tearing him apart. And Buckley just automatically reverts to calling him gay. I mean, like literally Buckley leaves being Buckley, you know, this great thinker on the right, and just, you know, resorts to name calling, which is just about the most leftist thing that you can do. But that's not even what that is anymore. Now, if somebody doesn't even like your opinion on a foreign country, they're putting out stochastic tweets to try and get you shot. It's insane. We're in insane times, and people need to recognize that, especially when you have when they basically have a street army that will pick up on things like this and be like, maybe we're supposed to go kill this person. Who the hell knows? I mean, really, you know, stay frosty, people, because these people are absolutely insane. The things that they're saying now. And I think the reason why they're doing it is because they know they've lost. Mark Levin's speech at the Republican Jewish conference the other day, is that what it was, in Vegas? It was held in Vegas. It couldn't be more perfect. That was complete insanity. That was the ranting. I mean, if we still had public asylums, you'd be pulling them into one. It was just absolutely nuts.
Yeah. And that whole thing about, do you think your stupid podcast is going to change the world? Like, what are you?
Well, didn't Benjamin Netanyahu, when he came here the last time, go on every single podcast?
Oh,
why?
And then call upon opinion molders to work together to advance the interests of Israel. Like,
if the stupid podcast,
he was asking people to get organized in the U.S. to make sure that their narrative gets out.
Yeah. If your stupid little podcast wasn't changing people's minds and opinions, you wouldn't be attacking Tucker. You wouldn't be attacking Tucker Carlson right now.
Yeah.
I mean, Levin is that guy is completely out of his mind. I mean, the only one who's as bad now, I think, that could be even considered to be like even worse, is John Podhoretz. Does anybody see that?
I can't even talk about John Podhoretz. Yeah, he's horrible. But guys, I'm afraid I got to wrap it up. I've been going for 4.5 hours. I got to see my wife.
Yes. Very quickly, Dr. Woods. We have many donations because you were on. I think one of these has a question directed directly to you. And the donator says, "Big thanks to Tom for coming on the stream. What does the guest think of Calhoun and his disquisition on government?"
I love it. And by the way, so did Murray Rothbard. He thought the distinction that Calhoun makes between net tax consumers and net tax payers was very valuable for understanding the exploitative relationship formed by state intervention. But yeah, I think it's crazy that people have been trained to think that his idea of the concurrent majority is a bad thing. That's the way. I mean, so in other words, these people have created this society filled with all these completely incompatible groups of people, and the concurrent majority would be a way for each of them to defend themselves against being absorbed by all the others, and you're not even going to give them that. So why are we doing this? So it's. I mean, there was. You remember? Well, you young pups won't remember, but remember Lonnie Guinier, the jurist nominated by Bill Clinton, I think for the Supreme Court, and she took inspiration from the concurrent majority of Calhoun. Now she wanted to use it for dumb reasons, but she didn't think it was it's not allowed because Calhoun is evil. Yeah, I think Calhoun was a very interesting political writer who should be read, and one of the most interesting people, political theorists ever in the U.S. But the very kind of people we're talking about today would be appalled. Oh, you can't talk about. I'm going to talk about whatever I darn well please.
By the way, if you go to the
Alrighty.
Confederate Museum, in Franklin, Tennessee, there's a John C. Calhoun section, and there's a bust of him in a Roman patrician robe.
Oh, how about that? I've not been there.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right, Tom, you got to get out of here.
All right.
Yes, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Woodshistory.com. Check that out. You get free courses from me. See you all later.
Awesome. Thank you. We'll link to that.
Yeah, we'll plug it
Alrighty.
at the end.
So I think that we've done a very good job going over Rothbard's main points throughout this.
Can I say something real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No matter what Rothbard or anyone thinks of John Burnham, James Burnham, if you think that he, that's fine. It's perfectly fine. That does not discount the fact that the Machiavellians, the Managerial Revolution, and Suicide of the West are books that you should read, study, and read more than once. They're phenomenal.
Yeah, and I agree. I would be a major hypocrite if I disagreed with that, because some of my research is on Burnham and inspired by Burnham's book on the Managerial Revolution. So just because he was National Review associated and served a specific purpose last century doesn't mean that you should treat him as verboten. Certainly not. So so with that said, I think that we covered the high points we really needed to, and of course, Tom Woods being here was a major boon to everything we were doing. So any last comments from either of you before we go through the super chats?
I'll just say that the point about the CIA can be a bit over exaggerated. Like, people throw this accusation at Tucker Carlson as if there's one CIA that's had one coherent ongoing plan for like the last 50 years or something, and Tucker Carlson's like also part of that, and there's no possible way he could be part of a different interest group that might also have ties to the CIA or other intelligence agencies. And even in Buckley's case, it's like Buckley having a handler and being part of the CIA doesn't mean that he had like E. Howard Hunt or someone else whispering in his ear like 24/7, telling him exactly what to say. It just means that the CIA can provide Buckley and all these other people with funds, helping get their works published, get their shows on air, this sort of thing. It's you're part of this network of, at that time, much more WASP network that was able to promote these people in a way that people like Rothbard and such simply couldn't compete with. But it doesn't mean that just because someone has connections to the CIA that they're automatically bad and they're automatically trying to subvert you, and there's no other possible interpretation. It's like there are, even at the time, it's like there's different interest groups in the CIA. It's not just one thing that's been going on for decades and decades. So just worth pointing it out,
right,
because there's a reason why the connections matter. It's not just like a label you throw at someone to discredit them.
Well, yeah, and that's a good point. I think the reason why it's so important with the National Review is, number one, it still harms us to this day. So, regardless of whichever faction did it, it's been very negative towards us. The other thing as well is that, and this is if anyone in the audience is skeptical about this, you should definitely read the book, since the book is very detailed and we didn't get to cover nearly as much of the detail of the book. Is that the CIA broadly at this time, and most of the presidential administrations, were very much in favor of, say, suppressing the old right in the American context, and doing away with anyone that just so happened to be isolationist or anti-interventionist. So it is very true that you should treat these organizations as heterogeneous and not be so monolithic towards them, and definitely not have this sort of shamanistic idea that they're just behind every corner influencing things away from you. But in this case, in this specific case, if it is true that the National Review was a CIA operation, we are worse off for it.
Yep, so let's get to the super chats then.
Yeah, alrighty. So with the document that I have in front of me, I have Christopher Burks for $2 gives us salute. Thank you very much. Melon for $15 also salutes us. So thank you very much. We salute both of you as well. Frenthusiast for $5 says OGC Tom Woods collaboration Christmas in November. It definitely feels like it. I was in disbelief leading up to this. I couldn't believe that we'd done it. So we've come a long way from 2022. Mana Yud Sushai for $4.99 says, I just want to thank Tom Woods for being one of the few people who kept me sane during the craziness that was the lockdown. Thanks, Tom. I wish that we had had just an infinite amount of time so I could convey that, but I did prioritize the question. So don't hold that against us. Thank you very much for the donation to the OGC. We greatly appreciate it. Wolf Larson for $10 for future microphone upgrades and audio technical improvements. Great show, guys. I don't think the audio equipment was at fault for this one. Maybe in past streams it was the audio equipment, but I think this was perhaps our internet issues and a variety of perhaps us not coordinating it well. So it's definitely not on us and not Woods. Ski Bum 220 for $10 salutes us as well. Thank you very much. Robert Affixham for $5. Who we already went over. His was the question on the disquisition. So yes, thank you, Robert, very much for the $5. Hopefully you found the answer by Dr. Woods to be sufficient, and I would second it as well. I did a stream with Mr. Aaron McIntyre on Calhoun's disquisition and found it to be enlightening. So it's a very good book. Alexander Hale for very generously gives us $49.99 without a comment. You know, it's a very generous thing to do. Shows an extreme amount of dedication, and not many people can say that they've actively contributed towards an American right doing things. So, yes, thank you very much. Melon for $3. The general public is made in these dummy-making factories. Yeah, a few of them in Pennsylvania are talking about closing because of the shutdown. Hope it happens. Same with most of healthcare, really. I tend to disagree, or not disagree, or agree wholeheartedly. I don't know if any of the panel has any comments on the shutdowns or perhaps what it's affecting.
Well, I really would like to see the air traffic controllers getting paid, because that seems to be a huge issue of safety, and for those who may be flying very soon. Yes.
Yeah, my flights are getting screwed up by it as well. However, if public schools shut down and the healthcare industry has to recorrect, I don't know. There might be at least some silver lining there. Bolero 393 for $5 says, Peter Bremelow's obituary of William F. Buckley says it all. He was a disaster for the right and a horrible person. I haven't actually read that. Have either of you two?
No, I did not know such a thing existed. So
yeah, I'm just learning that this exists. I gotta look this up right now.
I mean, it sounds like I have some really fun post-stream reading to do, because of Peter Bremelow obituary for Buckley. I hope it's as vitriolic as Buckley was towards Rothbard, because if so, that'll be it'll give me dopamine at least. David G for $20 says, Tom Woods has been a gateway for my changing perspectives in podcasts. Thank you, Dr. Woods. I think this is true for many people. So Tom Woods's contributions to the American right broadly is it would be very hard to overstate. Fascist Farmer for is that an Australian $10? It just says a $10. So it gives us a super sticker, and it's described to me as an anthropomorphic video game controller growing larger and muscular arms. Level up. Oh, Don Browning. Oh, okay. Moving on, we have Mana Yud Sushai again, $5 or $4.99. Egalitarianism as a Revolt Against Nature by Murray Rothbard is a great essay and must be read. The whole collection under the same name is also very good, and it is actually broadly ecumenical across the right, even to where I think former very extreme organizations on the right will recommend Rothbard's egalitarianism collection. So if basically everyone is telling you to read it on the right, you should probably read it. It's very, very beneficial. It's very good for an entry level too. If you have someone that's just starting and they want to know what you should read to really understand where the real right is coming from, anything that Rothbard has against equality and egalitarianism is a pretty good starting point. And then finally, Machiavelli sucks. Or actually, we have some more. Machiavelli sucks. For $4.99 says, why don't you guys take over after Trump? That's a good question. Pete, any thoughts? This seems like something that you'd be equipped to answer. Why don't we just take over after Trump?
Well, I mean, taking down the managerial state and dismantling the managerial state is something that is either going to take a very long time to do or has to be done all at once. I mean, in like days, like in a few days, you're going to have to do this. Do we have the resources to do that? Maybe not at this time.
Yeah, and I tend to agree. I think there's also maybe international forces that might strongly oppose us. That we've done great things as an organization, but most of it has been off of volunteer labor and voluntary contributions. So we have done very great things considering what we have, but I don't think we have quite enough to, take over the world's most powerful country in contest with many other organizations. So maybe one day, though. That would be fun. And then finally, I have Polly B for $20, says, Charlie's point about the CIA and Buckley is well made. It isn't that the regime gives marching orders, they back people already on side. Look how Nick Fuentes went from darling to coveted young talent to canceled and debanked. Yeah, and I mean, this aligns pretty well with how I understand what the state or the wider apparatus does, is they just make sure the people are already on side or they screw them over. I don't, it's not much evidence that they just send missives telling you to follow them. So that's all I have. Unless there's any comment on that last chat or any of the other ones, or any other general comments, I think that we're ready to chill. All right, with that, Pete, I think it would be beneficial, relevant to the beginning of the stream, if you could tell the audience where to find you, how to pronounce your last name, and any other works that you would like them to know you by. Is it Quinones? Is that correct?
I am the host of the Pete Quinones show. I only say it at the beginning of every episode.
Well, you know what? I skip the first 3 minutes of every episode because it's like I just want to get to the part where I just need to get to the part where Matthew Raphael Johnson tells us about his cats. That's what I skip straight to that.
I'll beat you up in a couple days, Charlie. Yeah, Pete Quinones show.
It's legitimately.
I have. Thank you. I appreciate that. Latest episode is Daryl Cooper. We talk about his project of doing Enemy, the Germans' war, and we use that as a jumping off point to talk about politics and culture in general. So yeah, check it out. All podcatchers. I put this one up on YouTube, so if you want to see it, YouTube, Rumble, my Odyssey channel too. So thank you. Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was very good that you were here. Particularly because of the subjects that were under discussion. Charlie, anything that you'd like to talk about, or anything else?
Well, I'm definitely behind in my own Substack, charlemagne.substack.com. So nothing really to show other than just mentioning the name of that. And yeah, check out our stream next week on the Monroe Doctrine, which is very, very important. Unfortunately, I'm going to miss it, but the Monroe Doctrine, I think, is not actually well understood, despite how often it is referenced. So I definitely encourage people to tune in next week to actually have the source material cited.
Yes, American Spirits is going to be talking about foreign policy and interventionism and the United States and Americans as it relates to that for just a little bit. This will be the start of it. So beyond that, I will be at the on American Spirits regularly, and besides that, I may have a few publications. You can probably find them on my Twitter account at Turnip Merchant. But besides that, I think that we would also like to once more extend a thank you to Tom Woods, who since has left, but nevertheless deserves the thanks and praise thereafter. But besides that, I don't think we have much else. So thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next week when we talk about the Monroe Doctrine and its misinterpretations.